Polish President Andrzej Duda's visit to China marks a pivotal moment in international relations, bringing a NATO member state leader to engage with China amid its support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, this meeting focused on Ukraine, peace, and expanding bilateral trade, highlighting Poland's desire for closer commercial ties. Joining us today on TVP World to delve into the implications of this visit and its impact on global security and foreign policy is Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Benjamin, great to see you. It's been a while since you and I have talked.
Right, so this is a very multifaceted topic here we are looking down. There's, of course, involvement of foreign policy, there's trade, and there's also a little bit of balancing between China, U.S., and the European Union. Can we first dive into the foreign policy aspect, because we do know that one of the goals of President Duda's visit is to try to have China draw away from Russia. But realistically, does Poland have any leverage when it comes to negotiating with China to make them distance from Russia?
Ben, it's a great question. In terms of the leverage that Poland has, actually more than many in the West might realize. And you can look at that on several levels. You know, in the coming year, in 2025, for instance, Poland will be taking the lead, or the chair, if you will, of the European Union. So that is going to give, immense influence to Poland in terms of any kind of economic discussions about trade that happen between Brussels and Beijing. Another one is the fact that one of the most important economic initiatives of China is its Belt and Road Initiative that relies on passage through Poland. And off the top of my head, I believe 90% of all that railway traffic into the EU either stops in Poland or passes through Poland. So certainly if you shut that down, that, in any kind of a spat, if you will, with Beijing, that would cause real significant economic pain to China, and as well as your own trade that currently exists between off the top of my head, I believe China is your second largest trading partner. So absolutely, the leverage is all there for Poland to wield. And I think those ducks are lining up in a row for you to do that over the course of the next year.
Right. Speaking of the Belt and Road Initiative, we saw the Central Eastern European region's engagement with China sort of waning during the 2019, before the pandemic, where we see a little bit of drop when it comes to the relation. And after COVID-19 pandemic, this region and China's relation and its trade seem to almost grind to a halt. Do you think that the revival of this relationship is part of a strategy to engage with China, not just economically, but on like a foreign policy sort of perspective?
Yeah, Ben, absolutely. I mean, that's the view from Warsaw, and certainly the view from Poland. From Brussels. In terms of what China wants out of it, though, I think they want their cake and eat it too. So, looking at it from a foreign policy standpoint, they're not ready yet to give in on a true peace settlement in Ukraine. They're still going to be taking Russia's side in that regard. And so in terms of any effort that the West makes, in particular, that Poland may make, it's going to have to try to use that economic leverage to create that foreign policy win, if you will, in terms of a positive peace settlement that sees Russia out of all of Ukraine. So, from that regard, I think what you're going to see is that China will continue to try to make the relationship economic, whereas Poland, rightly so, along with its European Union allies, will try to make it more about solving the problems in Ukraine and then, going down the economic path.
All right. So when it comes to the economics, I think Poland is in a place where it has to walk a very tight rope when it comes to the balancing, as we do want deals that can come out of China, more economic cooperation. At the same time, of course, we don't want to be funneling cash into a country that's also supporting Russia. How do you think the Polish president will be able to kind of juggle all these interests? We're talking about the national interest, the regional CEE interest, as well as the European Union interest.
Yeah, Ben, another great question. It is a balancing act. From Poland's perspective, they just need to go into this, and they are, eyes wide open, understanding what China wants out of it, what they want out of it in terms of Warsaw. And so when you manage this relationship, to look at it that way, and then just as we mentioned earlier at the beginning of the segment, to make sure you understand the leverage that you do have to balance that, because certainly China is out to use economics to get what it wants, as opposed to Putin using force. So it wants to create this leverage over Poland, and certainly it has. As I just mentioned a few minutes ago, Poland does have that. And I think it's about 14 billion a year trade deficit, or at least, I'm sorry, it's actually worse than that. 14 billion January through May trade deficit with China, and so certainly there's leverage on both sides. But from my perspective, I think strategically, in terms of what China wants to get out overall from the EU, Poland is sitting in a pretty good spot here to use its own leverage back. And I think one way to do that is to understand where China is at as an economy. Right now, they've got a lot of overcapacity, partly due to COVID shutting down their industries, but kind of an implosion, if you will, of their own manufacturing base, because there's just not enough demand. And so what they're looking for is new outlets, and they want to transit a lot of that through this China-European railway that goes through Poland, through Belarus, and Ukraine. And as Duda, let me wrap on that point, as Duda was smart to bring up, he pointed that out, that if China wants to achieve all of these economic initiatives in Europe, then it really needs to be just as invested in solving Ukraine, because part of that railway, that is such a key node, or a key point, if you will, to the Belt and Road Initiative, it goes through Ukraine. Another part of it goes through Belarus. But obviously, as you know better than I, on the ground there in Poland, relations right now between Poland and Belarus are not good, especially as they push the migrant crisis. So, China, all roads lead through Ukraine, in my mind, economically, and Poland would be smart to remind them of that and to use those leverage points.
Right, like you mentioned, Ukraine is a part of the Belt and Road Initiative railway, at least where the railway is situated. And as we can see in the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Hungary and Serbia, where he sees as the portal to the West, to the European nations, this Belt and Road Initiative, that he still puts a lot of emphasis on this initiative. So what are the likely outcomes of this meeting between Duda and Xi Jinping is going to be? Do you think there will be any significant deal that would further facilitate Poland when it comes to having this leverage with China?
Ben, I'd hope so, but I remain a little bit skeptical at this point, because I looked at the words that are coming from the Chinese side, and from Beijing's side, and one of the things is that they initially brought up, one of the key things is they want to help Poland with is your agricultural and food sectors, which is great. That's fantastic. But for someone that kind of looks to read the tea leaves of that, I'm concerned, because they know that that's been a point of contention between Poland and Ukraine that has caused, big distrust amongst farmers and the like. And so they may be trying to exploit that to create some internal havoc, because once you start down that relationship, you grow those things. China threatens to take them away. That can cause domestic strife inside of Poland. So, I'm a little bit leery that anything substantive is going to come out of this, but I do think both sides are able to lay markers down, basically to say, look, in the next year, Poland's going to have some outsized influence, because we are going to be chairing the European Union. We are one of the first that did sign on to or you being Poland, not me, did sign on initially to the Belt and Road Initiative, and that they're an important conduit, physically, logistically, et cetera, for China getting access to the European market via land. So, I would just again caution, if I had a catchphrase here, go into this with eyes wide open.
All right. And of course, speaking of things that are substantive, we also see that it's very likely that there might be a visa waiver program for Polish citizens going to China. Do you think that is something indeed substantive, or do you think it's more like a tossing Poland in the bone situation?
Yeah, Ben, you kind of answered your own question. It is more of a tossing of the bone. It's good for individual Polish citizens, and certainly it's good for trade. It's good for, in terms of business, Polish business people being able to travel freely to Beijing, Shanghai, and elsewhere in China. But for me, that's just more of a goodwill gesture, not a whole lot of substance to it.
All right, and then when again focusing on the substance, and I think I really like what you mentioned. They're going into this with eyes wide open. I think in order for Poland to juggle this balancing act well and not be stranglehold by China, a lot needs to be taken into consideration. We do also know that there is a potential of increased trade in the tech sector, but there's also an issue with Chinese tech where a lot of them are being used for, well, let's just make it clear, a lot of it's an espionage tool. Do you think that there will be also some sort of balance to be made there in order to still facilitate the economic side of things and not fall into the pitfall of some of these Chinese traps?
Yeah, you hit the core issue right on the head, Ben. From China's perspective, and it's been kind of interesting if you look at it from a historical perspective. In the 1950s and 60s, China was the one that had the nuclear rhetoric. It was the one pursuing a nuclear weapons program. Now you've got Russia doing that. Russia's the one that wants to threaten everything with nukes that they can, whereas China is saying, whoops, no, we want to do more of an economic side of it. So, from that standpoint, they are looking to continue to leverage their economic partnerships with Europe and the U.S. And elsewhere in the world to get technology and flow it back to China. And so definitely, in terms of any kind of trade agreements, any type of actual access to Polish technology, especially because there's going to be a burgeoning sector, in my mind, in Poland, just based off of added defense spending, what you're going to learn from the war in Ukraine and the like. China's going to be after that, and Poland's going to have its guard up and make sure that it's managing that technology flow and not just giving it away for free, because absolutely that's what China is after. At this point, they want the economics of it, they want the dollars of it, but they also want that technology to grow their own economy.
Right, and taking a step back, I would like to also zoom out, looking at the bigger picture. I'm wondering if there's any broader implication for this visit for NATO's entire strategic positioning.
Yeah, again, I think from NATO's perspective, Duda's role, if he had one, I'm not privy to that, was simply to lay these markers out, to basically say, look, if you want all of this economic access to the EU, and by default, essentially mostly NATO members, you're going to have to come to the table when it comes to Ukraine and put some brakes on what Putin is doing there. China so far is not willing to do that. I noticed that Xi, in a statement right after Duda had met with him, said that China opposes, and I'll quote, China opposes the attempts by some people using the normal trade between China and Russia to smear China and divert conflicts. So, Xi's not there yet, but message received, right? He got it. Duda did his job, at least from NATO's perspective, and delivered it. But now it's going to take diplomacy and just straight out economic brinksmanship with China to say, if you want to trade with us, if you want to grow this relationship with us, not just Poland, but all of the EU, then you're going to have to start making some compromises when it comes to getting Putin out of Ukraine.
Right. So a lot still needs to be unpacked. But meanwhile, thank you so much for your insight and input. Thanks for joining us on TVP World. Our guest is Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert. Thank you so much.